Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Cam and Crank, where today we dive into one of the most charismatic and intriguing motorcycles to ever come out of Italy, the 1976 Moto Guzzi Le Mans 850. This isn't just a machine defined by numbers on a spec sheet. It's a story of passion, engineering boldness, and a vision of what a sport bike could be when infused with Italian soul. At a time when Japanese manufacturers were rewriting the rules of performance with high horsepower, low weight, and cutting-edge reliability, Moto Guzzi chose a different path. They leaned into their racing heritage and their distinctive transverse V-twin layout, betting that character and authenticity could rival outright speed. The result was a motorcycle that captured the cafe racer spirit in its purest form. Fast enough to thrill, stylish enough to turn heads, and uncompromising enough to build a cult following. Today we're going to peel back the layers of this machine's story, starting with the climate that gave birth to it. We'll trace how Moto Guzzi took its racing DNA and distilled it into a road bike that demanded attention and loyalty. We'll explore the engineering decisions that made it both fascinating and polarizing, examining why some riders fell in love while others were left frustrated. And finally, we'll look at how the Le Mans 850 grew into a legend, its legacy as a cafe racer icon, and the impact it continues to have on motorcycling culture nearly 5 decades later. This isn't just about horsepower or lap times. It's about how a motorcycle can embody a philosophy. The Le Mans 850 was never the fastest, never the most refined, but it had an identity so strong that it outlasted its competition in memory and in myth. That's the promise of today's deep dive. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Le Mans 850 mattered then, why it matters now, and why collectors and enthusiasts still whisper its name with reverence. So settle in, because we're about to journey through racing pits, Italian design studios, and winding European roads to uncover the full spirit of Moto Guzzi's masterpiece. The road ahead starts with how the motorcycle world looked in the mid-1970s, and why a bold Italian alternative was both a risk and a revelation. The motorcycle world of the mid-1970s was in a state of upheaval. Japanese brands had reshaped the landscape with powerful, affordable, and reliable machines, while European makers were scrambling to keep their identities intact. Against this backdrop, Moto Guzzi introduced the Le Mans 850, a motorcycle that fused its endurance racing heritage with bold Italian styling. This was not a safe play. It was a defiant gesture that said performance did not need to come at the expense of personality. Micro-story: in Mandello del Lario, a lakeside town in northern Italy, Moto Guzzi had been refining the transverse V-twin since the late 1960s. Engineers noticed that the design's cooling. Advantages and unique torque delivery could work in both racing and road applications. When they tested early prototypes on endurance circuits, the bikes didn't always dominate in outright speed, but they gained reputations for durability and handling. That reputation fed directly into the creation of the Le Mans, which wore its racing DNA on its sleeve. Micro-story: the arrival of the Le Mans in 1976 coincided with Ducati's 900 SS making headlines, BMW gaining ground with its R-Series, and the Japanese pushing harder with inline fours. Riders had choices like never before, but the Le Mans stood out visually. Its angular, half-fairing, bold paintwork, and aggressive riding position gave it a unique silhouette. It wasn't just another motorcycle. It was a statement piece, a way for riders to project identity. For many, that identity was about rejecting conformity and embracing Italian individuality. Context digest: at 844cc, the engine made around 80 horsepower, enough to push beyond 130 miles per hour. More than the numbers, though, it was the way the bike delivered its power that mattered. A visceral surge accompanied by the rhythm of that transverse twin. Riders described it as alive, almost like a companion rather than a tool. The shaft drive added stability at speed, but introduced quirks in cornering. Quirks that seasoned riders learned to anticipate and even enjoy. Micro-story: stories spread quickly among enthusiasts about long road trips across Europe on the Le Mans. Riders reported not just covering distance, but arriving with a sense of having conquered the ride rather than just completed it. Some spoke of the bike's stability at high speed on the Autobahn, others of carving mountain passes in the Alps where its handling shined. These tales gave the Le Mans a mystique, less about being the absolute best, more about being unforgettable. Reflection bridge: the heart of the Le Mans story isn't found in sheer performance figures, but in how its quirks shape the bond between rider and machine. Context digest. To understand why the Le Mans resonated, you have to consider European motorcycling culture at the time. Cafe racers weren't about raw specs. They were about style, rebellion, and individuality. The Le Mans slotted perfectly into that ethos, offering factory-built performance that felt handmade and personal. It gave riders a shortcut to the cafe racer dream without having to build one themselves, while still offering the authenticity of racing lineage. Microstory. In the UK, where cafe racer culture had its strongest roots, the Le Mans became a cult machine almost overnight. Riders who wanted to stand out from the crowd of Japanese fours gravitated toward its exotic Italian charm. Magazine reviews highlighted its charisma, praising its brakes and criticizing its price, but always returning to its ability to stir emotion. Riders who owned one became evangelists, spreading the gospel of the Le Mans at local meetups. Context digest. Pricing was always a double-edged sword. The Le Mans cost significantly more than some Japanese rivals, but Moto Guzzi pitched it as an investment in artistry and heritage. Buyers were paying not just for performance, but for an identity tied to Italy's storied racing past. That made the bike aspirational, a dream for many and an attainable reality for only a few. Reflection bridge. This tension between aspiration and accessibility is what set the Le Mans apart, ensuring it was never just another machine in a showroom. Microstory. Across the Atlantic in the United States, the Le Mans carried a slightly different meaning. It wasn't about cafe racer culture so much as it was about standing out in a land dominated by Harley-Davidsons and the growing influx of Japanese bikes. American riders who chose the Le Mans were making a bold stylistic choice, embracing European performance at a time when it was still relatively rare. Owning one in the US was a statement of taste and individuality, making the Le Mans a connoisseur's pick rather than a mass-market option. As the Le Mans 850's reputation grew, so too did the debates. Was it a flawed gem or a masterpiece misunderstood? That conversation would shape its second act, as praise and criticism collided to define its legacy. As the Le Mans 850 rolled into the late 1970s, its presence in the motorcycling world became impossible to ignore. Enthusiasts celebrated its sharp looks and distinctive character, while critics pointed to its quirks as evidence that it wasn't a true competitor to the rising tide of Japanese superbikes. This clash of perspectives gave the Le Mans a strange kind of power. It wasn't just another motorcycle to buy or ignore, it was a motorcycle that demanded an opinion. Microstory. In endurance racing circles, the Le Mans DNA was often praised. Its stability at high speed and its durability over long distances made it a capable machine for riders who valued consistency over sheer explosiveness. Some privateer racers campaigned modified Le Mans models, and while they rarely toppled the giants of the field, their reliability became a hallmark. These stories fed back into the road bike's mystique, creating a loop where racing pedigree validated street credibility. Context digest. At the same time, the Japanese manufacturers were pressing forward with motorcycles like the Kawasaki Z1 and Honda CB750, machines that offered smooth, refined performance in packages that were increasingly affordable. Compared to these, the Le Mans could feel raw and expensive. Yet that rawness was exactly what some riders craved, a rejection of sanitized perfection in favor of something with edge. Microstory. Owners often recall the learning curve of mastering the Le Mans handling. The shaft drive's tendency to lift the rear under throttle, combined with its weight, made it less forgiving than chain-driven rivals. But those who learned to ride it smoothly found a reward in its balance and predictability at high speed. This process of bonding with the machine, of adapting to its quirks, became part of the ownership experience. The bike demanded commitment, and in return, it gave a unique kind of satisfaction. Reflection bridge. The Le Mans 850 was not trying to please everyone. It was a motorcycle built for those willing to meet it halfway. Microstory. Moto Guzzi's design team leaned heavily into aesthetics to complement the performance. The narrow seat, angular fairing, and bold red and black paintwork projected aggression and elegance in equal measure. This look became instantly recognizable, cementing the Le Mans as one of the most photogenic motorcycles of its era. Owners didn't just ride them, they displayed them, proud of how the machine represented Italian artistry. Context digest. Reliability debates often dogged the Le Mans. While its engine was robust, Electrical gremlins and fit and finish inconsistencies sometimes frustrated owners. Compared to Japanese bikes that ran with clinical precision, the Le Mans demanded a higher tolerance for imperfections. But for many riders, those imperfections were part of its charm, proof that it was made by human hands rather than robotic efficiency. Micro-story. In custom culture, the Le Mans quickly gained traction. Builders loved using its strong frame and distinctive engine as a foundation for cafe racer projects. Some stripped them down to bare essentials, others leaned into wild paint schemes. But in nearly every case, the core of the Le Mans gave the project credibility. This adaptability kept the model relevant long after newer motorcycles eclipsed it in performance. Reflection bridge. Every quirk that might have been seen as a flaw also became fuel for its cult following. Context digest. Press coverage reflected this polarization. Some magazines declared it one of the greatest European sport bikes of its time, praising its handling and braking. Others dismissed it as overpriced and outdated next to Japanese rivals. The result was not consensus, but conversation. And conversation kept the Le Mans in the spotlight far longer than its sales numbers might suggest. Micro-story. Stories from owners highlight just how personal the experience of riding the Le Mans could be. One rider might gush about how planted it felt sweeping through alpine passes, while another complained about the vibration on long highway stretches. These contrasting accounts didn't cancel each other out. Instead, they reinforced the idea that the Le Mans was not neutral. It inspired loyalty or criticism, but never indifference. Micro-story. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Moto Guzzi released updated versions of the Le Mans, tweaking performance and styling. Purists argued that the original 850 had the purest expression of the concept, while others welcomed the refinements. These debates only added to the mythology, ensuring that the 1976 model year remained the benchmark by which all others were judged. The rising stakes of this debate set the stage for the Le Mans' transition from contemporary competitor to enduring icon, a shift that would secure its place in motorcycling history long after newer machines took the headlines. By the time the 1980s rolled around, the Moto Guzzi Le Mans 850 was no longer competing head-to-head with the latest superbikes. On paper, it had been surpassed in nearly every measurable category: horsepower, top speed, refinement, even price. But something interesting happened. Instead of fading into obscurity, the Le Mans began to transform into a legend. Its flaws, once seen as limitations, now became badges of authenticity. Micro-story. Collectors in Europe started to notice that early Le Mans models, especially the 1976 originals, held their value unusually well. While Japanese machines from the same era were often ridden hard and discarded, the Le Mans was preserved, cherished, and in many cases, restored with painstaking detail. Owners treated them like heirlooms rather than tools, recognizing that this motorcycle represented a pivotal chapter in Italy's resistance to homogenization. Context digest. The cafe racer scene, which had begun as a youth movement in Britain, spread globally in the 1980s and 1990s. The Le Mans, with its aggressive stance and endurance racing DNA, became a natural fit for this aesthetic. Builders didn't have to stretch its identity. It was already a cafe racer at heart. As the style evolved from grassroots garages to boutique shops, the Le Mans maintained credibility as both a factory original and a customizable canvas. Micro-story. In the United States, the Le Mans acquired a different aura. Riders who owned one in the late 1980s or early 1990s were often seen as connoisseurs, people who understood motorcycling as culture rather than simple transportation. Spotting a Le Mans parked outside a cafe in San Francisco or New York was a sign of someone making a deliberate choice, not following a trend. The bike's rarity on American roads added to its mystique. Reflection bridge. Over time, the conversation shifted from whether the Le Mans could compete to why it continued to inspire. Micro-story. Custom builders in Japan and Australia also embraced the Le Mans, sometimes blending traditional cafe styling with modern technology. The transverse V-twin engine, with its cylinders jutting outward, became a visual centerpiece that builders highlighted rather than hid. These interpretations carried the Le Mans into new generations, proving that its essence was timeless even as motorcycling tastes evolved. Context digest. By the early 2000s, Moto Guzzi itself leaned into the legacy of the Le Mans, acknowledging its importance in keeping the brand relevant. Retro-styled models and limited editions nodded back to the 1976 original, recognizing that the spirit of individuality and Italian craftsmanship remained a powerful selling point. Microstory. One powerful testament to the bike's legacy comes from riders who never sold theirs. Some Le Mans owners have kept their bikes for decades, passing them down through families or preserving them in collections. They speak not of owning a machine, but of curating a piece of history. This level of emotional connection is rare in motorcycling and highlights the unique bond the Le Mans forged. Reflection Bridge. What began as a risky alternative in the 1970s had, by the 21st century, become an enduring symbol of identity over conformity. Microstory. Even today, when modern sport bikes boast triple the horsepower and electronics that make them nearly foolproof to ride, the Le Mans offers something those machines cannot: a sense of raw engagement. Riders who climb onto one describe an immediate connection, a feeling that they are participating in the act of motorcycling rather than simply operating a high-tech machine. That experience is what cements its appeal to new generations of enthusiasts. Context Digest. Auction houses now feature early Le Mans models as prized lots, with well-preserved examples commanding significant sums. This market validation confirms what riders have always felt. The Le Mans is not just a motorcycle, it is cultural capital, a tangible symbol of a time when passion guided engineering decisions. Microstory. The Café Racer revival of the 2010s further elevated the Le Mans profile. Young riders seeking authenticity rediscovered it, and online communities buzzed with admiration for its lines and history. Photos of restored or customized Le Mans bikes spread across social media, introducing the machine to audiences who weren't alive when it first launched. In this way, its legacy became self-perpetuating, fueled by nostalgia and modern reinterpretation alike. In the end, the Le Mans 850's impact isn't measured in production numbers or trophies won. It's measured in how it redefined what a motorcycle could mean: a vessel of identity, a bridge between racing heritage and personal expression, and a reminder that sometimes imperfection is exactly what makes something unforgettable. Its legacy endures not because it beat the competition, but because it dared to be different, and because riders and collectors alike continue to carry that spirit forward. The story of the 1976 Moto Guzzi Le Mans 850 is ultimately about the triumph of identity over conformity, a motorcycle that proved character could be as enduring as raw performance. From its racing-inspired roots in northern Italy to its cult following in Britain, America, and beyond, the Le Mans showed that motorcycling is not always about the spec sheet. It is about how a machine makes you feel. Over the past few chapters of its life, we've seen how the Le Mans emerged in the shadow of Japanese superbikes, refusing to copy their formula. We've seen how its quirks both divided and united riders, creating a bond between man and machine that transcended numbers. And we've seen how it evolved into an icon, treasured by collectors and celebrated by cafe racer culture decades after its launch. The lesson the Le Mans teaches us is clear. True icons are not defined by universal appeal. They are defined by their ability to inspire loyalty, debate, and passion. A flawless motorcycle might win sales charts, but a motorcycle with soul carves itself into memory. That is why, even today, the Le Mans remains a reference point in conversations about style, heritage, and individuality. For modern enthusiasts, the takeaway is that motorcycling is at its best when it is personal. When a machine challenges you, engages you, and rewards you with a feeling that cannot be replicated by numbers alone, you have something rare. The Le Mans embodies that rarity, and that is why it continues to matter. So as we close this exploration, remember that the next time you see one of these machines gleaming at a meet, parked outside a cafe, or roaring down a highway, you're looking at more than a vintage motorcycle. You're looking at a symbol of resistance to conformity, a reminder of an era when risk created legend. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.